In November 2011, Ron Johnson became CEO of JC Penney. He had built Apple's retail stores from zero to the highest revenue per square foot of any retail chain in the country. He had put Target on the map as a design-forward mass retailer. He was, by nearly every professional assessment available at the time, the best retail executive in the United States. 17 months later, he was fired. In those 17 months, JC Penney lost $4.3 billion in sales. The stock dropped approximately 50%. The company burned through cash at a rate that alarmed lenders and required emergency credit facilities to maintain operations. The customer base, 112 years of accumulated loyalty, built on a specific and documented relationship between JC Penney and its shoppers, was damaged in ways that would take years to begin repairing. The standard version of this story is a warning about applying a successful strategy from one context to a fundamentally different one. Ron Johnson built Apple Retail for a customer base that didn't exist until Apple created it. He tried to apply the same principles to a customer base that had existed for over a century and that had very specific, well-researched, and entirely different needs. That version is correct. It is also incomplete in a specific way that makes it significantly less useful as a lesson, because the information that would have told Johnson his strategy was wrong was available before he implemented it. It was available in JC Penney's own customer data. It was available in the existing research on retail pricing psychology. It was available in the explicit warnings of people inside the organization who understood the customer and who raised concerns that were not acted upon. The strategy didn't fail because the information was missing. It failed because a specific, identifiable decision was made not to look at that information before committing. JC Penney's customer base in 2011 was, in its essential characteristics, the opposite of Apple's. Apple's retail customer came to the store because the product was aspirational. The experience was designed to elevate the transaction, to make purchasing a phone or a laptop feel like participating in something. The price was fixed, non-negotiable, and premium. The customer understood this and accepted it because the experience justified it. JC Penney's customer came to the store because of value, specifically because of the psychological experience of getting a deal. The coupons, the seasonal sales, the clearance racks, these were not inefficiencies in JC Penney's business model that a better CEO would eliminate. They were the product. They were what the customer was buying. Research on retail pricing psychology had established this with considerable consistency. The face value of a discount matters less to consumers than the experience of receiving it. A sweater marked down from $60 to $30 produces a different psychological response than the same sweater priced at $30, even though the transaction cost is identical. The feeling of having found a deal, of having navigated the sale and emerged with a win, is a meaningful part of the consumer experience at certain retail formats. JC Penney's customer data showed this. The company had extensive purchase history, loyalty program data, and customer research that documented the price sensitivity and deal-seeking behavior of its core shoppers. Johnson did not test the new pricing model before rolling it out. This is not a contested fact. He confirmed it himself in interviews after his departure. When asked why the strategy was implemented without testing, he said, approximately, that at Apple they didn't test. They just built the product they believed in and put it out. That decision, to forego testing, is the single most actionable thing in this entire case study. Have you ever been in a situation where the confidence in a strategy was strong enough that testing felt like an obstacle rather than a step? Leave a comment. The pricing model Johnson implemented was called fair and square. The premise was honest, and the logic was internally coherent. JC Penney would eliminate the artificial inflation of prices that existed only to enable subsequent discounts, and would instead price products at their actual fair value from the beginning. No more fake markups. No more 40% off sales on items that had been priced to be discounted. The logic was correct as a description of the pricing game most retailers were playing. The logic was wrong as a prediction of how JC Penney's customers would respond. Sales dropped immediately, not gradually, immediately. In the first quarter after the new pricing was implemented, comparable store sales fell 18.9%. In the second quarter, they fell 21.7%. By the third quarter, the company had burned through a significant portion of its cash reserves and was drawing on credit facilities to fund operations. The customers who had been coming to JC Penney for the deal experience did not respond to fair prices by recognizing that they were getting the same value without the theater. They responded by going to Macy's and Kohl's and Target, where the theater was still available. A Dartmouth marketing professor who reviewed the failure wrote, with characteristic understatement, that this was one failure she had honestly seen coming. The published academic research on promotional pricing psychology, available well before Johnson's appointment, would have predicted the customer response with reasonable accuracy. The research wasn't hidden. It was in the journals that marketing academics read and that retail executives are expected to be aware of. If this level of pre-mortem analysis, the information that was available before the decision that would have changed it, is what makes this channel worth your time, the like is the direct feedback. Johnson had never run a company that served the JC Penney customer. He had run companies that served a fundamentally different customer. The assumption that the principles were transferable was not tested before it was deployed at scale across more than 1,100 stores. The 160,000 JC Penney employees who were working in those stores during the 17 months of the Johnson strategy did not have access to the board-level strategic decisions that were changing the conditions of their work. What they experienced was the customer response directly. Store traffic declined visibly. Associates who had built relationships with regular customers watched those customers stop coming. The questions from shoppers, "Where are the sales? When do the coupons come back?" were questions that the employees could not answer honestly because the honest answer was that the strategy had eliminated the thing the customer was asking about. The reputational damage to employees whose professional identities were tied to the JC Penney brand, people who had worked there for 10, 15, 20 years, was real and was not captured in any financial metric. Johnson was paid $53.3 million to take the job and was awarded compensation that totaled over $236 million during his tenure. The company had nothing to show for it except billions in lost revenue and a customer relationship that took years to begin repairing. The executives who approved the compensation package and the strategy were the same people who, when the strategy failed, were positioned to supervise the transition to the next CEO. The people who paid the real cost were the ones who couldn't leave. The JC Penney case teaches a lesson that is simultaneously obvious and consistently ignored. Strategies that have worked brilliantly in one context require validation before being deployed in a fundamentally different one. The lesson is obvious. It is also consistently ignored because the conditions that produce it, a highly credentialed leader, strong board support, a clear strategic vision, institutional momentum, are exactly the conditions that make the validation step feel unnecessary. Johnson's confidence in his own strategic judgment was not irrational. His track record at Apple and Target was genuinely impressive. But that track record had been built in contexts that shared almost no customer profile characteristics with JC Penney. The track record was real. Its applicability to this context was not demonstrated. The practical thing, before implementing a significant strategic change in any organization, identify the one assumption that the entire strategy depends on, and that hasn't been verified in this specific context. Not the most complex assumption, the most foundational one. For Johnson's strategy, it was JC Penney's customers will respond to transparent, fair pricing the same way Apple's customers respond to premium fixed pricing. That assumption was never tested. It was wrong, and it cost $4.3 billion. The next episode looks at a case where the foundational assumption was tested, where the data was gathered, the customer was understood, and the response was still not what the analysis predicted, which is the version of failure that is hardest to defend against, because it removes the comfortable explanation that someone skipped a step. This content was developed with the support of artificial intelligence tools and underwent human review, editorial curation, and approval before publication. The analysis presented here is strictly educational and philosophical in nature, grounded in behavioral psychology and classical stoicism.